The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Also, we take a broad look at what's happening in the markets. Plenty of things for us to digest and keep an eye on as we head into 2025. Here to break things down as we continue our year in review of what's been happening in the markets and looking ahead to next year. Dan Basse, president of Ag Resource Company, is with us here on the show. And Dan, it is great to catch up with you again. Merry Christmas to you and yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Merry Christmas to you, Jess, and to everyone out there. Hope it's a good one.
Well, let's take a look here broadly to start at the grains and oilseeds. It's no question, Dan, it's been a interesting year in the markets and the ag economy, and a tough one for some folks. And here we are closing out the year. We've been trying to have a little bit of a Santa Claus corn rally, so to speak, but that's really about it. It just feels like these markets are kind of marking time until the new year and plenty of questions ahead, Dan.
What do I think that's right, Jess? And, this is my 45th year. I hate to say that, but 45th year being in this industry. And the one thing that always strikes me is we need demand drivers, right? If you think about when agriculture and U.S. farmers have done well, it's been in those years where we had demand drivers like China and ethanol combining from about 07 up to about 13. If we look backwards, the Russian grain robbery, we go back to other things, whether it be world wars, we just don't have those drivers. We were hoping that renewable diesel would be one of those demand drivers, but then Chinese UCO, used cooking oil, showed up on our shores, and here we're kind of left with a flat year. All the grains are down. On the other side of the fence, so is livestock. They had a better year, and that's helping out to some degree. But, from the grain side of things, really not much to talk about in terms of a demand driver that can take us to a bull market or something that, would be more inspiring going forward.
Well, and thinking about, trying to find some sort of bullish demand or something, Dan, I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's necessarily out there. And one area that I think you and I could talk about here is China. Obviously, and this ties in with the tariff potential from President-elect Trump and more, but that Chinese grain demand, I mean, there's a lot of question marks surrounding that, and they're always kind of that 1,000-pound gorilla in the room, Dan.
Yeah, there's no replacement, Jesse, for China. I mean, it's as simple as that in the world grain markets. And so, today, like the United States farmer, the Chinese corn price is down around $7.30 a bushel. This is, in the interior. And so, it's hard to say that that's below the cost of production. But when you have these small farms in China, it's below the cost of production. So, we estimate about $7.82 the price of Chinese cost of production on corn. So the Chinese farmers losing money. And in that, the Chinese government has not been willing to import large amounts of corn. And they already have 2 years of wheat store per se, just in case if something were to go wrong. So with that in mind, I don't have China buying maybe more than 8 or 10 million tons of corn. Last year, they bought 23. And in the case of wheat, they bought 13, and maybe we've got them 4 or 5. The only wheat I can find that they bought through the first half of the crop year was out of Australia for 500,000 tons. So a much different Chinese import profile. And that hurts, if you will, in terms of world grain demand.
Well, and obviously South America, you got to throw them into the picture here in the conversation, and the continued strengthening of relations between China and Brazil and Argentina, et cetera. And I know Brazil's getting ready to harvest a big soy crop. We're going to plant that safrita crop, and weather's been good there. So, I mean, you take a look at South America, and that just, that's another piece of this whole conversation when it comes to the global grain market picture, Dan.
No, it really is. South America lining up, and if I were to say, what is the word of the year for the past growing cycle, what comes to my mind is a strange world called duopoly, in which the government power centers are now Washington and Beijing. We're sharing them. And so this is the new future as BRIC countries align themselves against the G7. And I'm afraid that's the world we're walking into in 2025. With that in mind, China is going down to Brazil. They'll buy the vast majority of their soybeans. And if they buy any corn needs, it'll be from that country. And that kind of leaves us, as I said, without any interest from a new buyer that would get excitement. Thank God for Mexico, because 2 years of drought have gotten Mexican corn markets demand turned on. But again, Mexico may not be the big driver that China is going forward. So that's something to think about for 2025 and 2026.
Well, and looking at things here for the American farmer, Dan, Already a lot of talk about the acre mix for 2025. Where do input prices fall? How does that affect things? So, I mean, as you're talking with farmers here, winter mating season ongoing, what's one of the big messages you're sharing with them as they look at depressed commodity prices and a depressed ag economy right now?
Well, this is a sell and defend kind of market, Jesse, in which we need to sell ahead. We need to be cognizant of premiums in the back. And if we get closer above break even, we need to sell something just to get something on the books. Now, the goal is not like every year. We're just trying to make sure that we make a little bit of money. And then I'm hopeful that maybe President Trump, if we do get into a tariff retaliatory war with some countries, will send us some Trump bucks. I mean, he did 23 billion back in 18 and 19. So, the message is sell and defend, be thinking about the opportunity in the future, looking at new crop corn and beans for next year. Because if Brazil has good weather and a record soybean crop over 170 million tons, the odds are that soybean prices drop below $9 a bushel. That means that corn can't go much above 450, and it kind of resets the whole landscape for the year ahead. It takes a big weather problem, supply driven, if you're going to have any kind of sustainability to rallies.
And you mentioned, that sell and defend, and that comes down to just a good, robust risk management plan. I hear this so much, Dan, that a lot of producers, they play the cash market. They don't want to mess with futures and options. But in this day and age, I mean, we know that risk of trading futures and options can be substantial, our favorite term to use. But a lot of producers, if you're not wading into that game, you almost have to, or find someone, a trusted advisor to help manage that risk on the farm, right?
No, you really have to. This is that kind of landscape. If we go back and look at net farm income, I'm now talking about net. USDA data showed that 63% of that net farm income was relative to the farm marketing decisions that everybody makes. So it's a big portion. I know we as farmers always do the best crops, way of raising crops as we can. We look at it like our firstborn son. But at the end of the day, it's the decisions that you make in the markets that really have the driving impact in terms of whether you expand or what you do in terms of financial situation in the farm. So to your point, Jess, you need to be thinking ahead. You need to be having trusted advisors. And again, ask for their track records, ask how long they've been in the business, and make sure that they're a partner with you in your operation.
Absolutely. I should ask you for a few comments on the livestock side as well as we close out the year. You mentioned earlier things have been a little bit better there for our friends in the cattle industry. Hogs have had a rally here towards the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. Feed margins have been good. It's a different story on the animal ag side, isn't it, Dan?
It really is. I call it two sides of the fence. And so if you're on the grain side, it's not looking so good. But on the livestock side, it really looks pretty good. I think we're going to see the beef market set all-time highs in a year ahead, maybe above $200 a pound. I think that the hog market has some vim and vigor now that we're kind of shifting to a liquidation phase in the breeding herd. And I think the dairy markets, there's one that we don't talk about very often, are looking really good as we're finding a lot of dairy on beef. And so as we said, we don't breed those bottom ends of the herd and replacement costs are high. The dairy side of things is looking quite interesting, particularly with milk protein being as cheap as it is relative to the other traditional proteins that are out there.
Dan, I always appreciate the insight. Anything you would leave folks with or reiterate to them here today on the show?
What keeps me up at night is still the same thing, which is competition. Our friends in Brazil are making money. Their currency stays cheap. They're going to keep expanding. Look at the year ahead as being an opportunity. Pay attention to December corn. If it gets above 450 or beans get it back above 1050 November, it's the opportunity ahead. And unfortunately, we're up for a couple of years of trudging markets unless we get a weather problem. So if you sell, then the only time we have to defend is heading into that growing season of a new cycle.
We'll watch it closely, and we'll look forward to a conversation in the new year. agresource.com for more. Dan Basse, Ag Resource Company. Always appreciate it, sir. Thanks for joining us today on the show.
Merry Christmas, Jess, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. There, you can watch our latest interviews with the top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. Just go to youtube.com/markettalkag and hit the subscribe button, or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.